This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Now, on this channel, we nominally cover news from the UK, usually focusing on things like the economy, the upcoming general election, or the various crises affecting the UK. What we don't focus on all that much, though, is news from any of the sub-nations of the UK. However, there's a lot happening in these places, especially at the moment in Scotland, where their new Hate Crime and Public Order Act is currently being introduced. Now, it's worth noting that this was actually passed back in 2021. However, given it's coming into effect next week, there's been lively debates taking place about the relative merits of the law and the concerns about its impact on free speech in Scotland. Given this lively debate, then, it's worth actually looking through the law, what it changes, and ultimately, how it could be enforced. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, it's worth starting this video by looking at the background of the Act, so we can understand exactly what it's trying to change. There are two key pieces of legislation that the Act builds on and interacts with: the European Convention on Human Rights, or ECHR, and the Public Order Act of 1986. The ECHR is an international convention, drafted in 1950 and passed in 1953, which the UK has been party to due to its membership of the Council of Europe. As part of the ECHR, UK citizens are given the right to freedom of expression. Article 10 states that everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and that this right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. It's worth pointing out, though, that this is a qualified right, meaning that governments are able to limit the right to freedom of expression if it interferes with someone else's rights. A good example of this is the case of Pavel Ivanov versus Russia 2007. In this case, Ivanov was convicted of public incitement to ethnic, racial and religious hatred after he published a number of articles portraying Jews as a source of evil in Russia. In assessing the case, the ECHR stated that his actions undermined tolerance, social peace, and non-discrimination. They added that the applicant may not be afforded benefit from the protection afforded by Article 10, as his actions violated Article 17. The point is that the right to freedom of speech here in the UK is not absolute, and can be restricted in order to protect people against discrimination. This is something the 1986 Public Order Act did, with it explicitly outlawing racial hatred. The Act goes on to say that an offence is caused only if the perpetrator intends to stir up racial hatred. While the Act does make clear that an offence can be committed both in public and in private, it does say that no offence is committed where the words or behaviour are used or the written material is displayed by a person inside a dwelling and are not heard or seen except by other persons in that or another dwelling. So it's clear that while the Public Order Act did lay the groundwork for outlawing hate speech, it did leave some scope for future governments to go further. This is what the Scottish Government has done, with them expanding the list of protected characteristics to include not just race, but also age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, and variations in sex characteristics. The Act also creates a new offence of stirring up hatred, which applies to any of the aforementioned characteristics. Unlike the racial hatred offence outlined in the 1986 Act, the Scottish Act makes clear that for a person to be guilty of this offence doesn't just need to be intended, a person just needs to behave in a manner that a reasonable person would consider to be threatening or abusive. Another way that it deviates from the 1986 Act is that conversations in the house are not exempt from the offence, something that free speech advocates have taken issue with. Now, it's worth mentioning that the Act does specify some limitations. It explicitly references the ECHR and states that consideration must be paid to freedom of expression, as outlined in Article 10. It also specifies that the Act should not be used against people who simply discuss or criticise matters relating to any of the characteristics, and even calls out religion specifically and states that people are allowed to express antipathy, dislike, ridicule or insult towards religion or religious beliefs. However, while the Scottish Government clearly tried to defend against complaints by including these limitations in the Act, they've still attracted quite significant controversy by pressing ahead with it. One of the main criticisms is that the Act puts a lot of pressure on the police and justice system to determine what actually constitutes a hate crime. While the Act tries to provide more protections to a wider array of groups, it also establishes a lot of vague exceptions to these protections. By not defining these more rigorously, the government has effectively kicked the can down the road and put this burden on those who have to enforce the Act. So far, little is known about how the police are intending to enforce the new law. David Kennedy, the General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, recently stated that the main training resource for this new Act is a 2-hour online course which is not fit for purpose, and that we are asking officers to police a law that they're unprepared for. Speaking about this point further, Brent Haywood, a partner at the Scottish law firm Lindsay's, explained that law should be certain and the citizens should know what conduct is or is not criminal. Now, it's worth explaining for their part, the Scottish Government believes that this Act is an important step in creating a more tolerant society. When introducing the then bill, Humza Yousaf explained that every day in Scotland around 18 hate crimes are committed, and that the effect of these crimes are felt deeply by those targeted, and this prejudice has a pernicious effect on the health of society and its communities. It should also be noted that some have also criticised the fact that the Act does not include sex as a protected characteristic. However, the government has defended against this by explaining that they're going to introduce separate legislation that deals specifically with misogyny at a later date. So, all in all, it seems that the Scottish Government is keen to try and strengthen the existing hate crime legislation, and that they believe that the Hate Crime and Public Order Act does just that. However, there are some questions about exactly how it will be implemented, and exactly how to draw the line between the right to free speech and protections against threatening language and abuse. We'll just have to wait and see how well this Act walks that line. Now, understanding exactly what has or is going to happen here can be a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate lots of information from different, often partial sources. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And, well, our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can help you do just that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a few spare minutes a day. And with your spare few minutes, you'll learn by actually doing, with Brilliant providing hands-on lessons that help you play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. And that way, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.